we're seeing a lot of mixed messaging among Democrats. One day they're, all about the USAID funding that has been shut down by the Trump administration. The next day they're really focusing on Elon Musk.
Right. Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by congressional reporter Samantha-Jo Roth. SJ, what's the current status of President Trump's nominees being confirmed by the Senate?
Well, it looks like he's really going to be getting all of his nominees through. Some of the most controversial ones we just saw confirmed this week. Tulsi Gabbard, who is going to be the chief intelligence officer, basically, of the U.S. And then we also saw RFK Jr., who is going to head up the Department of Health and Human Services. These two picks were extremely controversial. We even saw a very rocky confirmation hearing for both of these two. But, it looks like Republicans are all going to fall in line, and they are going to, they basically all just voted to confirm these nominees. Some of them did need to receive some assurances in writing. Some of them needed to be pushed over the line by Vice President J.D. Vance and some allies. But overall, it's looking like President Trump is going to get every single one of his nominees that he wants through.
So what's interesting is you mentioned Vice President Vance. When Pete Hegseth had his confirmation vote, Hegseth needed Vance's tie-breaking vote to get over the finish line. Vance wasn't even in the country for the Kennedy and Gabbard votes, so there must have been a certain confidence from Senate Republican leadership that they really did have the votes.
Yeah, there definitely was. We saw people last week signaling that they were going to, vote for Tulsi Gabbard. In the committee, there were a couple of votes that were uncertain. At one point, we saw Susan Collins, we saw Todd Young, and James Lankford, who had all kind of had, interesting interactions with Tulsi Gabbard in the hearing. They all came out, said that they were going to support her. And, when you looked at the math, it was just, no matter what, it looked like there was going to be enough votes all along. So Senate Republicans did feel good about moving forward. And there were also some Republicans who had signified that maybe they had some concerns, like Senator Curtis of Utah. And then he ended up saying, I trust my Intelligence Committee colleagues and I'm just going to follow their lead. So it looks like a lot of these Republicans really feel like they want to give deference to the president. They want him to have his cabinet, and they did receive assurances. Whether these nominees or, now confirmed secretaries are actually going to follow through on those promises is an open question, but they were enough to assure some of these Republicans of what they needed. The only one who did not vote for all three is former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who is no longer in leadership, and he feels, very clearly okay for him to voice his disappointment with some of these picks, and he's been very outspoken about those. But he has been very. It's not all of them. It's just the the controversial ones. The others, he almost every day we get like a press release saying McConnell is proud to support X, Y, and Z cabinet secretary. It was just some of the most controversial ones that he felt the need to speak out about.
So it's interesting, that was considered to be one of the reasons besides health that he left his leadership position to give himself the freedom to oppose the Trump administration if Trump became president again on things where he wanted to oppose them, which is a lot harder to do in leadership. But also it does raise questions, is he really trying to influence any other Republican senators in the way that he once would have as leader? Because nobody's, since Hegseth, with the exception of Hegseth, nobody's really voted with him yet.
Well, I will say that, from other Republicans that I've spoken with, they have said that, he has been very quiet. He's not openly telling people about his vote. He's not openly trying to convince anyone. I think a lot of this has to do with his legacy. Sure. He's likely not going to be serving after this term. And I think he's just trying to make his mark with his legacy and oppose some of these more controversial picks. So I don't believe that he's trying to influence anybody else.
So we're hearing some buzz about the possibility of a government shutdown or using the threat of a government shutdown as leverage. That's usually something you hear from the more conservative elements of the Republican Party, but it's coming from a more unlikely source this time.
Yeah, I think Democrats are really understanding that they don't have very many powers right now, especially the fact that they are in the minority. When you look at specifically the House, their margins are just so narrow. So, most of the time you can't get a lot of those very conservative members on board with these government funding agreements, and they usually do rely on those Democratic votes. So we're starting to hear that maybe Democrats are considering withholding their support. Obviously, they're very upset about what's going on with the executive branch going in and gutting a lot of these agencies without their consent. Almost every single day we've seen them outside of a different federal agency rallying, upset. So I think they're, pretty frustrated. It's really an open question as to who is going to get the blame if they were to decide to withhold their support. I think classically it's not a good look for anybody to shut down the government. But, I think Democrats right now are arguing, well, Republicans are all in charge of, all three branches. So if they can't among themselves figure it out, then, the blame will be on them. However, Democrats very recently had, admonished Republicans who were in a similar position from when they were in power, saying that, they would be to blame if the government shuts down.
Right.
So I think, they're really trying to consider what to do. I don't think it's going to be a good look for anybody to shut down the government. And I think a lot of people on the outside are trying to urge Democrats, if that's where they're going, that, it's not a very popular move with the American people. And, as we've seen, this administration so far has been very popular with their, work to try and weed out waste. An overwhelming number of Americans are happy with that. So, may not be the most popular move for them to go and shut the government down.
Right. And Democrats seem to be like they're trying to find their footing in all Republican Washington right now.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of mixed messaging among Democrats. One day they're, all about the USAID funding that has been shut down by the Trump administration. The next day they're really focusing on Elon Musk.
Right.
We also saw one group that was saying, well, hey, Doge, why don't you go at the Pentagon budget?
Right.
So I've been hearing a lot of frustration among Democrats about the messaging, especially since this is really one of the only tools that they have at their disposal. So we saw how successful Republicans have been with this and repeating the same message over and over and over again. So a lot of Democratic strategists are really urging Democrats to follow the lead of Republicans who have been very successful with this.
Got to pick a message. Thank you, SJ.
Thank you.
You can read SJ and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.